There's nothing about those maps that helps people. We don't have when they drew those maps, we didn't have a budget in North Carolina. So, you've got SNAP benefits being cut on a national level. You've got all these things happening. And the focus of the General Assembly is how can we partisan gerrymander? One more district where a map is already gerrymandered that no one asked you to do, and it helps no one to do it. And so anytime, again, when we talk about our democracy, anytime our elected leaders are doing things that don't benefit the people, then regardless of your party, we should have a problem with that.
Hey there, I'm Jesse Fox Mayshark, and this is Headlights, Voices from the Progressive South. Headlights is a production of the Progressive South, a nonprofit media platform dedicated to amplifying progressive voices and values across the southern United States. Voices like Marques Thompson, organizing director for the group Democracy North Carolina. It's a nonpartisan nonprofit that advocates for voting rights and fair representation in the Tar Heel state. He had a lot of interesting things to say about the challenges and necessity of advocating and organizing in an especially contentious political environment. That conversation's coming up, and later we'll check in on an exhibit in Nashville that pays tribute to a rich musical legacy out of Alabama. But now, the weekly news roundup. Of course, the news last week was dominated by a couple of acts of government violence that did not take place in the South. The removal by U.S. forces of the president of Venezuela, and the killing in Minneapolis of unarmed observer Renee Good by a federal immigration officer. I'm not going to talk about those because it's not my beat, and there are plenty of other people doing that. But I wanted to acknowledge them because they occupied my thoughts for much of the first week of 2026, as they probably did many of yours. Here in the South, the new year picked up much where the old one left off. The three stories I want to hit on this week are follow-ups or updates on some familiar themes. Voting maps in Louisiana, children's nutrition funding in Tennessee and other states, and curriculum crackdowns in Texas. First, those Louisiana maps. We have, of course, talked about this before. In 2022, a federal court found that the state's congressional maps were racially discriminatory, since they allowed for the likelihood of a black representative in just 1 out of 6 districts. This in a state where the population is about 1/3 black. In 2024, Louisiana adopted a new map, creating a second majority-minority district, which is currently represented by Congressman Cleo Fields, a Democrat. But a group of white voters challenged that map, essentially alleging that in trying to remedy the racism of the previous maps, it had committed a reverse kind of discrimination. That case was argued before the Supreme Court last fall, and several conservative justices sounded ready to further restrict the use of the 1965 Voting Rights Act to craft majority-minority districts. Republican legislators in many southern states are awaiting that decision eagerly, hoping it will allow them to further gerrymander their states for partisan purposes without regard to the impact on racial representation. There had been some hope that the Supreme Court's conservative majority might even rush the decision and deliver it in the middle of the court's term, in time to redraw those maps ahead of the 2026 congressional elections. In Louisiana, the state legislature even held a special session in October to delay qualifying deadlines for this year's election by a month, in case the decision came down by the end of 2025. But it didn't. And at this point, court observers expect that it probably won't appear until near the end of the court's term in June, when most major decisions are released. That would be too late to affect this year's elections in most states, whatever it might mean for the future. And it's already too late for Louisiana in particular. Even with that 1-month delay, the state no longer has time to draw new maps before the February qualifying deadline for this year's candidates. So for this year at least, it seems likely that Louisiana will again elect 2 black congressional representatives. But the great redistricting frenzy may not be over quite yet in the South. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis just last week called a special session of his state legislature for April to consider possible changes to its congressional maps. Florida has pushed its candidate qualifying deadlines back to June to allow time for new maps to be approved. The April timing is set to give as much time as possible for the Supreme Court to issue its decision in the Louisiana case. DeSantis said explicitly that he imagines the ruling will, quote, implicate at least one or two of the state's current majority-minority districts, which in practical terms means the legislature could redraw districts currently held by Black or Latino Democratic representatives without violating the Voting Rights Act. Now, Florida being Florida, there's some contentiousness around all of this, with the Republican-led Senate on board, but the Republican-led House talking about going ahead and doing a new round of redistricting in the next few months without waiting for the Supreme Court. There's also the problem for Republicans that drawing districts for purely partisan gain is barred by the Florida state constitution. Although the goal could be to rush maps through for this year's elections and deal with whatever legal challenges follow. The goal is to produce another 3 to 5 Republican-leaning congressional seats, adding to the massively gerrymandered advantage Republicans already have in the state. Despite that constitutional prohibition, the GOP already holds 20 of Florida's 28 districts. Meanwhile, here in Tennessee, Governor Bill Lee has, for the second year in a row, refused to apply for federal funds to provide food to lower-income children across the state during the summer. The Sunbucks program, as it's known, administered by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, provides $120 per school-age child to qualifying families, which can be used to buy groceries. For families who already receive SNAP benefits, the money's just added to their accounts. States that plan to participate this year were required to apply for the program by the end of December. Tennessee did not, becoming one of just 11 states that didn't opt in. Not surprisingly, 6 of those are in the South. Besides Tennessee, they are Florida, Georgia, Mississippi, South Carolina, and Texas. Lee's office didn't offer any comment on the issue to the Tennessee Lookout. The state is foregoing $84 million in federal funds, which would have helped feed 700,000 children. The program's intended to help families who rely on free school meals for their kids during the school year, but then have larger grocery bills during the summer. Last year, about a dozen Republican governors, including Lee, turned down the program, complaining that it was an expansion of the welfare state and/or that it costs money to administer. In Tennessee, the administration cost is about $5 million. In other words, the program brings about $17 in federal aid for every dollar the state spends. As a substitute last year, Tennessee offered a much more limited program using state money, spending about $3 million to offer aid to children in just 15 of the state's 95 counties, and not in its 2 biggest cities, Nashville and Memphis. It served just 18,000 kids, less than 3% of those who would have been served statewide. In Texas, the state is turning down more than $400 million, which would help feed about 3.75 million children. Florida is foregoing about $260 million, which would help 2.1 million children. All of these moves, of course, are in line with the generally anti-public assistance stance of Southern conservatives, who have long inveighed against safety net programs as promoting what they call dependence on the state. You can see the same thing in another federal program, Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, or TANF, more commonly known as just welfare. Of the 10 states with the lowest TANF monthly payments, 7 are in the South. And of course, turning down the summer food money doesn't hurt only the families who would have received it. It also directly hits the state's economies. All of that money is spent in local grocery stores. According to the Food Research and Action Center, the economic impact of the program in Tennessee in 2024, the last year it participated, was at least $115 million into local cash registers and paychecks. And now to Plato. The Greek philosopher, one of the pillars of Western scholarship and civilization, is the latest victim of the ongoing crackdown on what conservatives call a DEI in education, by which they generally mean anything that discusses race, gender, sexuality, etc. This has taken a particularly vicious form this school year at Texas A&amp, the state's largest public university, with 79,000 students across 5 campuses. Last summer, an A&M student secretly filmed a video of a discussion of gender identity during an English class. The class was about children's literature, and one of the books students had read was Jude Saves the World, a young adult novel with a non-binary protagonist. During discussion of the book, the student challenged the professor on the material and said she thought it was violating President Donald Trump's executive orders restricting DEI in higher education. The professor replied that she disagreed, and the discussion continued. But the class was abruptly canceled a few days later, although the professor was not formally reprimanded, since she had not actually violated any school policy or state law. Then in September, a Republican state representative leaked the video from the class, along with another recording of the student confronting Texas A&M President Mark Welsh III, in which Welsh initially supported the professor. Outrage went viral among state Republicans. Welsh quickly fired the professor and demoted the dean of the College of Arts and Sciences and the head of the English department. But that wasn't enough to save his own job, and he stepped down under pressure a few days later. The closest that school officials came to giving a reason for all the fury was that the professor's course description didn't make clear that she would be including discussion of LGBTQ issues. Robert L. Albritton, the chair of the school's Board of Regents, told reporters in September, quote, "A student should know what they're getting into. That's the real issue here. You can't bring a student into a class on one pretense and have another pretense talk. Okay, that's the rub in all of this." This is, of course, an idea somewhat antithetical to the whole project of higher education, which is, or at least was, designed to include exposure to unfamiliar perspectives and ideas. If students need to be assured that nothing in a course will trouble their pre-existing notions of the world, the classroom would become a hazardous place. And that is exactly what the Board of Regents proceeded to make it. A new set of policies they adopted in November required that any course discussing, quote, race and gender ideology, or topics related to sexual orientation or gender identity, needs the personal approval of the campus president. The rubber met the road last week when, just before the start of the spring semester, faculty across the system were informed that about 200 courses in the College of Arts and Sciences would be affected, and would need to make changes to their curriculums or be dropped altogether. The class that has become the poster child for this effort to suppress politically disfavored ideas is, maybe not surprisingly, in the philosophy department. Professor Martin Peterson, who is among other things the Sue G. and Harry E. Bove Chair of the History and Ethics of Professional Engineering, was notified that his class on contemporary moral problems had some moral problems. The class relies heavily on readings from Plato's Symposium and seeks to apply different philosophical approaches to a range of contemporary issues. Here's what the course description says, quote, "Philosophy challenges students to understand, articulate, and evaluate arguments from multiple points of view. Students evaluate the claims, presuppositions, and reasoning of various positions, including one's own, on contemporary social problems, and analyze those problems using ethical and social theories," unquote. Among the topics on the syllabus are natural rights, the right to bear arms, abortion, the ethics of war, the death penalty, and race and gender ideology. The latter lectures sounded alarms up the administrative chain, and Peterson was informed by his department head that he had to either drop those discussions or give up the class entirely, in which case he would be reassigned to teach a different philosophy class, which just happened to meet at 8 a.m. on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Peterson reluctantly agreed to remove those materials and is replacing them with discussion of free speech and academic freedom. But the philosophy prof, who also chairs Texas A&M's Academic Freedom Council, isn't taking it quietly. He's spoken to multiple media outlets, including the New York Times, to which he said, quote, "We cannot have just one perspective in the classroom. Then there's nothing to discuss. There's nothing to learn. It's indoctrination. It's Soviet-style education," unquote. He's been supported by both the campus chapter of the American Association of University Professors and the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, which has often sued colleges over free speech issues. In a statement, the AAUP chapter said, quote, "Silencing 2,500-year-old ideas from one of the world's most influential thinkers betrays the mission of higher education and denies students the opportunity to engage critically with the foundations of Western thought. A research university that censors Plato abandons its obligation to truth, inquiry, and the public trust, and should not be regarded as a serious institution of higher learning. We are deeply saddened to witness the decline of one of Texas's great universities," unquote. Of course, Plato and his teacher Socrates had some complex ideas about freedom of speech themselves. Socrates argued in favor of restricting education to only include poetry and stories that encouraged certain traits, like courage, obedience, and self-discipline. And, like the university administrators of today, Socrates ultimately found that he couldn't tailor his lessons sufficiently to appease the powers of his city. During a period of political turmoil and heightened civic passions, he was accused of corrupting the youth of Athens with dangerous ideas and of worshipping false gods. He was given poison and put to death. Maybe it's just as well if the Board of Regents doesn't hear about that. Okay, now we're to my interview with Marques Thompson, who's the organizing director for Democracy North Carolina. The nonpartisan, nonprofit advocacy group was founded in 1991 and over the years has focused on issues including the influence of corporate money on North Carolina politics, fair representation in political district maps, and expanding ballot access through early voting and other means. Thompson was raised in eastern North Carolina, and he's been dedicated to community service since his youth. While working a day job as a FedEx driver for more than 20 years, he became active in organizing with Democracy North Carolina and eventually came on staff. He has also had advanced training from the Leadership for Democracy and Social Justice Institute at the City University of New York. As we've talked about here before, North Carolina is a politically fascinating state, one that in 2024 elected Democrat Josh Stein as governor while also voting for Trump for president. Its legislature is heavily dominated by Republicans, primarily because of the way they have drawn their own political districts. That included a special session called late last year to do an emergency redistricting to squeeze yet one more Republican-leaning congressional district out of the map for this year's election. I talked to Thompson about that, about the mechanics of organizing effectively statewide, and also about the impact a recent wave of aggressive immigration enforcement across the state might have on voters. I really enjoyed talking to him, so Seth, let's go to the tape. All right, Marques Thompson, thanks so much for joining me.
Yeah, thank you for having me. A pleasure.
So I think the work that Democracy NC does is really interesting, and one thing that strikes me about it is that this is not a new organization.
Yeah.
You all have been working on these issues for a long time. Can you start out by maybe just walking me through a little bit, like what does Democracy NC do? What do you focus on? And how do you do it? What are your strategies and your tactics?
Yeah. So Democracy North Carolina, like you said, we've been around 33 years. We got our start from the civil rights movement and SNCC. So our founder is an awesome liberal young man, not so young anymore, but awesome guy. Named Bob Hall, who had his background in research and organizing, again, with SNCC and civil rights movement. And so out of that, we were part of Democracy South. And out of that came Democracy North Carolina. And our work is basically to make democracy accessible to as many people as possible. Primarily, we focus on those that have historically been cut out of our democracy, black people, black and brown people, younger people often get discriminated against in our. So anyone, we have a tagline that I love to say all the time, that we want a democracy or a government that is of, by, and for the people, and we see that level of participation decreasing, so we fight against that. So some of the policy things we've done over the last 30 years is like same-day registration, which is something that's big in North Carolina, was spearheaded by Democracy North Carolina. There was a time when we had community funding, public funding of judges. That was part of the work of Democracy North Carolina. And we're a nonpartisan C3 organization, so we were big on exposing funding problems with both Democrats and Republicans in our history. And so now, as things changed, we spent a lot of time now pushing back on some of the egregious things that are happening in North Carolina from the General Assembly. So that's, the monster law. As I said, there was a time when we had like the worst voting rights law in the country, where they were trying to cut all the early voting sites and bringing photo ID, all of these things, and we were able to beat back that with a large coalition of folks in the state. And so Democracy North Carolina, that's our work, is to try to make sure that people have access to their democracy, know how it works, and make sure that it works for the people.
And how do you do that? Who do you work with? Who do you try to get activated and involved? Like what does that look like on an ongoing basis?
So one of the things that we do well is, again, our the founder had a history kind of background. Research. So we combine research, organizing, and what we call advocacy, and now it's more like communications, that kind of thing. But we combine those three things to make sure that like our organizing is informed by research about what's effective, what are the numbers as far as who's voting and who's not, and what they need in order to vote. How do people respond to like early voting sites and that kind of. So the research informs where our organizing team puts forth their efforts. But then it also goes the other way around, where we've got organizers across the state. We're a statewide organization, so we're constantly in communities, training people, educating people, but also listening, learning, like where are the problem areas, where are the touch points, and then we use that information informs our research, and to see what are the things, and all of that informs our advocacy strategy. So we really focus on Black and Brown communities, but we do a lot with like our partners from across any interests. So we do a lot of work with like the right now immigration and those people in that work are we're working closely with them. But criminal justice is something that we always do. The environmental movement, the LGBTQ movement. So any progressive organization that's working to help and the better the lives of people, that's going to require them to access their democracy, whether that be through elections or through advocacy or something. And so we're there to help with that process.
And so you're the organizing director, right? Yeah. And you have then sort of like regional directors in the different areas of the state. Mm-hmm. Do you kind of coordinate all of those efforts?
Absolutely. I try to as best as possible and try to have a coordinated front, because across the state there's always something that's happening locally where the organizers are handling that on a local level. But then there's things that we're doing across the state, like our county boards of elections monitoring. So that's a very, a local program when it's administered, but it's a statewide program. So across the state, we have, the same form where people are filling out, hey, this is what's happening at my county boards of elections. And then we'll have like campaigns, because every county in North Carolina has a board of elections that decides, administers that election. And so, we'll have people across the state advocating for early voting plans, advocating for sites and that kind of thing. And a lot of times, like now, pushing back against, where they want to cut us. I think probably maybe national attention. I know a lot of attention around the state is A&T, a historically Black university that typically would have a polling place. They're trying to pull it for the primary. And and so that people say, well, hey, we want that polling place there, and so so that's the kind of work that we do across the state, and trying to, like you said, coordinate that and make sure that that everyone is clicking on the same page as best as possible.
Mm-hmm. And I know you grew up in North Carolina. Can you talk a little bit about your background and kind of when did you become, I guess, politically aware and engaged? And what led you to the work you're doing now?
So I was raised as one of Jehovah's Witnesses, and so they are they're not political, right? So I would go door to door, and I would, try to help people to know about God and to better their lives spiritually. But I always would, see people in these situations and know that some of the reasons why they were in those situations was political. And, and I had a concern not just for their eternal life, but their life right now, what can we do about that? And so as I got older and got away from that religion, and there was this guy, Barack Obama, was campaigning in 2008, and I was like, man, this is it really something. And of course, there was a lot of attention in North Carolina then. But I always tell the story of I did dabble with that, or I worked with that. But I'm a blue collar guy, man. I'm just a FedEx driver really at my heart. And so one day I'm driving a FedEx truck. I would get off of work. Well, the story is, and this is a real story, I'm also a person of faith, as I said. So I walk into the office after delivering packages or whatever, and it looks like the newspaper, I kid you not, it looks like it's glowing. I mean, there's a little square that looks like it's lit up to me. I go over there and look at it, and there's a invitation or a advertisement, whatever, for the coffee party was having a meeting in Greenville. Now, I had driven to Raleigh early on, to go to a meeting with these folks, but there was one happening in Greenville, and so where I'm from, where I was working, and so I went to the thing. I met this, a guy there, took an interest in me, two guys, and kind of took me under their wing, and next thing I know, I met that. So I show up at this meeting, and they're like, you're pretty good. You want to host the next thing that we're doing? I'm like, I just showed up. You want me to host something? They're like, yeah, you can do it. And a guy named Ray Solis, a great guy, helped me, took me under his wing, and I did the candidate for, it was a forum that I was hosting, and an economic forum, I should say. And then I met the guy from Democracy, North Carolina, who, like the next day, whose job eventually I would get. So that was really like my entry into like this work. And I was a volunteer for many years before I got on staff. But like that's that. And so I'll also say Jay Gellergo, who was the guy that working at Democracy, North Carolina. There was this new program called Pathways to Power, which talked about how a person can understand the power they have as a citizen and how they can maximize it by working together through organizing with Democracy North Carolina. And that training changed my life. And I'm so happy to say that 17 years later, so they stopped doing that thing after I got here. They were like, we're not going to do this anymore. But now that I'm the organizing director, this year we brought back Pathways to Power. And it was such a full circle for me to like be able to once again share the things that still relevant today, the power of citizen-led organizing in our community today. So really a full circle moment for me this year.
Yeah, well, and that's a great story because it really illustrates the importance, I guess, of when somebody wants to get engaged and maybe has, like you obviously had skills and abilities that somebody recognized and said, like, oh, here's somebody who can, like we're going to put this guy to work. And that seems like, because I think a lot of times when people want to get involved, maybe they go to one meeting and nobody talks to them, or it they don't click with it or whatever. So that's obviously, so I assume, like, as you're saying, you try to do that thing and encourage other people in the organization to like be alert to those people as they come in and try to identify them and put them in a place where they can be effective. Absolutely.
I mean, that's the only way we're going to do this is by making sure that people, because again, the people have power and they have agency, and when you can identify the power of a person, because society and definitely the political environment is designed to beat that out of you. As I say, you don't have agency, you don't have power, no one cares what you think or what you do, but that's not true. And so when you can like activate that in a person and say, no, and especially maybe you feel like that alone, but listen, you're not alone. Like, I feel the same way you do, and your interests are connected to my interests, and we're all connected in this community, and together, brother, we can do whatever we need to do. And so that message is, I think, the heart of Democracy North Carolina, and like we really try to continue that even in this like digital age and all. And you see that we kind of struggle with organizing as a thing because we get away from that. We get to the more you can focus on individuals working together in community, nothing will stop that. And so to the extent that we can focus on that is going to be the extent that we're successful.
So North Carolina obviously has remained a very politically dynamic place in recent years, and just this year, I feel like the emergency district redrawing that they just did in the legislature, it didn't get quite as much attention as what happened in Texas because that was kind of a bigger deal and there were more seats at play. But that was clearly an example. I mean, North Carolina's maps are already pretty gerrymandered, and that was a case of them kind of coming back and taking another bite at it. How did you all engage with that?
It was terrible. And so one of the things that we have been doing with that is, number one, telling the public. I mean, when you hear, and I want to shout out one of our partners, you always do this, is, Common Cause is hand in hand with us. The NAACP works closely with SCSJ. So, I want all my partners and stuff to know, we don't do this alone. We work strongly in coalition at Democracy North Carolina. But yeah, when you hear the comments, and my brother at Common Cause does this very well, the comments of the senator that his name just jumped out of my head. It's like Hig, but I don't want to say it wrong. But that drew those maps, and he basically outlines the reason for it. And what's so sad about it is that in no way in those comments is he talking about the will of the people. Nobody asked that. No, there was nobody from North Carolina knocking on his door saying, "Hey," or the General Assembly saying, "Hey, we really want you to redraw these maps." There's nothing about those maps that helps people. We don't have when they drew those maps, we didn't have a budget in North Carolina. So, you've got the SNAP benefits being cut on a national level. You've got all these things happening, and the focus of the General Assembly is how can we partisan gerrymander. One more district where the map is already gerrymandered that no one asked you to do, and it helps no one to do it. And so anytime, again, when we talk about our democracy, anytime our elected leaders are doing things that don't benefit the people, then regardless of your party, we should have a problem with that. Because we need to be represented. But it's not like we're living in a utopia right now. We've got real problems that really need solutions. And when our leaders are not concerned about that, but are concerned about anything other than that, then I don't care what your party is. I feel like that's a problem. That's a problem in representation. So, and what's funny about North Carolina is it's crazy about this gerrymander. North Carolina is a very, what they call a purple state. I mean, and I said this in my comments, so we had, a press conference, we of course let people know, we had a portal where we were encouraging people to make comments and stuff. And one of the things I said in the press conference is, anytime, the people are not at the center of what a legislature is doing, then it's a problem, It's supposed to be of, by, and for the people. So anyway, it's been really difficult, facing that. It's been a slap in the face, basically. And so I live in the district. District 1 was the district that was targeted. So it's very personal to me. I mean, it really was a retaliation against the people of that district, because the legislature basically says, we don't like the way you voted, and so we're going to try to reduce your power.
Yeah, and can you talk a little bit more about the impact that has in terms of representation? That, the idea of representative democracy obviously is, as you're saying, that you represent the people of your district and listen to their needs and concerns, and then, carry those to the state house or to Congress or whatever. What happens when the districts are being drawn not for those kinds of representation, but just to sort of like consolidate power in one particular party?
Yeah, what happens is the people don't have true representation, and so the people suffer. It means that the people don't really have a voice in decision making because there's no one that really understands their situation, their problems, and is responsive to it. So, that district that was cut is a majority black district, and so that's why it was targeted, Frank. They'll say it was Democrats, and those things are one and the same in the South a lot of times, because of polarized voting. And so, so the people in this district, my district, now have a harder time being able to choose a representative that truly is of us and for us, and going to work for us, that we can trust. And so then we don't have representation. So that is, and if you think about that, my community, it's a very rural district. So when you think about, it's just so funny. A lot of times people think about like a black person, they're going to think about an urban person. There's a kind of a stereotype that comes to mind. But that's a country, very rural, black space is what is the majority of those counties, and economically distressed. And so you would need a representative to understand that and to understand the specific concerns. And when you just are drawing lines in order to get a certain party power, then that representation fit, and it hurts everyone. So and when we have these redistricting fights, unfortunately, we've had, I think, 4 redistrictings in the last 10 years. Where you're only supposed to have one every 10 years. We've had 4 because of the General Assembly. And every time we do that, when they allow us to have a hearing, every time there are Republicans that stand up and say, I don't like this gerrymander. Because I live on the coast, so I'll never forget this, in Little Washington, where I was actually born, Eastern North Carolina. So I can call it Little Washington. Anyone else, they might be mad with you. But the guy says, hey, I make my living on the river, and a white Republican guy, he says, I make my living from the river. I really care about that. And the way this district is drawn, we're going to be represented by a guy at the top of the state who doesn't know me and my. And so, people understand. People really want representation. They really, the power structures believe that party is the only thing that people care about. But when you know people and you talk to people, that's not what they try to make it like that. But most people care about, do you really understand me, my problems, and are willing to fight for me, whoever your party is. And so that's why you would get, in North Carolina, definitely, people vote for, Donald Trump, the Republican president, and a Democratic governor all the time, or a Democratic senator and a Republican because whoever they feel like will fight for them, that's who they're going to vote for. And so it's a terrible situation when the parties think that they don't respect the people enough to think that if I do a good job, I'll be rewarded by the people. No, I'm going to use my power to draw maps and I'm going to choose my voters instead of letting the voters choose me. And
right, and then the representatives become more beholden to the party, right, that put them there, as opposed to the people who actually voted.
Absolutely. The people are the furthest thing from their mind. And your last guest was talking about the money interest and stuff. So, yeah, they care about the party and they care about the money and not the people. And again, North Carolina is a special thing. See, I really believe in democracy. I really believe that North Carolina has a great situation, because when you have elections that could be as tight as ours could be, you get the best of both worlds. You can get people actually fighting for the best ideas, fighting for the person that truly connects to the people, and we would be better off. That is a competitive advantage that we have here in North Carolina. But we squandered that when we draw maps where now the representatives don't have to care about their ideas. They don't have to care about the people. They only have to care about the parties or the money. And so the people are nowhere in the equation. And that was on full display when the brother drew those maps and didn't talk about the people not once.
So another reason that North Carolina has been in the news recently, obviously, has been the big surge of immigration enforcement, especially in Charlotte. And I know that's not the central focus of the work that you all do, but obviously, it seems to me there's some overlap in the sense of, if you have a population there that is being intimidated, not only people who maybe are undocumented, but people who are here legally, who are citizens, but who are maybe afraid to, leave their homes, much less go to the voting booth on Election Day. I guess, how do you think that plays into the issues that you guys do work on?
Yeah, absolutely, because it's going to affect or the fear is that it could affect people's willingness to vote, and they're feeling safe to do so. In Charlotte, where we first were visited, let's just say nice. They had the organizer there was just telling me, this was just yesterday, that they had asked people in a meeting, how many of you are carrying your passport now? Listen, you got citizens, not everyone of a certain heritage. All of them were afraid, and then and others, black people, white people, everyone kind of, because when you start just grabbing people off of the street and can do that, then everyone is afraid, because anyone could be, someone could say, hey, you look like a Dominican, person, and where's your ID? And so if there's no protections for one person, there's no protections for anyone. And so when the rule of law is weakened like that, it hurts our democracy. So people are afraid to will potentially be afraid to vote. And we have been working hard to try to make sure that we can counteract that, because we don't want the participation to drop, definitely not next year, because of this fear. And right now, that could definitely be the case if we have this same level of intrusion from the federal government.
Mm-hmm. Well, so speaking of next year, and maybe to kind of wrap up, next year is obviously going to be a big election year. What are you all focusing on? What are the particular issues or races or anything else that you're paying most attention to or are going to be most active in?
Yeah. So next year we're going to be treating this as much as possible like a presidential year, as far as like just really trying to make sure that we protect early voting plans, do vote protection, and the race, we want to make sure that it doesn't get swept under the table. There's been word that maybe $1 billion might be spent on the Senate race. I've heard that number a couple of times now, and that's fine. But the state Supreme Court is a very, very important race for people to understand what's going on. So we just talked about partisan gerrymandering. The state Supreme Court ruled that partisan gerrymandering was unconstitutional in North Carolina, and then there was an election. The character of the Supreme Court changed, and they reversed themselves. They really came in and said, hey, that thing that we just decided, let's look at that again, and reversed themselves. It wasn't based upon, new evidence or new facts on the ground. So that Supreme Court is so important for us to have fair maps. In order for us to have fair maps, we got to have fair judges. And so we want to make sure that people understand, again, we're nonpartisan, but we want people to understand, like, the issues. We want them to know what's happening with the power that state Supreme Court has, and to be able to make their, vote, knowing everything about that race and that power, the power of that court.
Mm-hmm. And so how do you gear up for that? Is this going to be a, recruiting volunteers? I mean, is this going to be having people out to do voter education? Like, what is that going to look like?
Absolutely. So we're going to be recruiting everybody so we'll be doing a lot of literature distribution. We'll be doing a lot of, what's on the ballot, flyers. We've got a voter guide that we'll be doing. So all of this is voter education trainings all the time, just to let people know what's going on and how they can participate. And of course, we'll be doing voter contact phone banking, door knocking, and all of that kind of stuff. But to do it at scale, we need each and everybody that is willing to be able to help and to say, one small action done over time, done repeatedly, means a lot in a state like North Carolina. And so we'll be working with our partners. We'll be registering voters. We do a lot of that through our partner organizations, registering. We'll give like mini grants to people on the ground, like food banks and stuff, where they're dealing with people and help them to register voters. So all hands on deck. Anything we can do to make sure that people understand what's at stake in this election and how they can participate in it, we'll be doing it all next year.
All right, and people can get information about all of that and how they can get involved if they want to at, I think it's democracync.org, right?
Democracync.org, or you can go to our ncvoter.org is another website where we'll be hosting our voter guides and all the information about how to get registered, how to change your registration, when the elections are happening, all of those things. Democracy North Carolina and ncvoter.org are two websites to go to.
All right, well, really interesting stuff, and really appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.
I visited Muscle Shoals, Alabama for the first time last year. It's a cool town, really a collection of towns, the Quad Cities: Muscle Shoals, Florence, Sheffield, and Tuscumbia. The whole metro area isn't too big, with a combined population of about 150,000 people. Muscle Shoals itself has about 16,000. It's in the northwestern corner of Alabama on the shores of the Tennessee River. The river figures in its etymology, or at least that's the most common theory, that the town was named for shallow shoals in the river where people collected freshwater mussels to eat. The name somehow ended up being spelled muscle like a bodybuilder rather than muscle like a mollusk. But beginning in the 1960s, the small town gave birth to not one but two recording studios that would both become legendary: Fame Studios and Muscle Shoals Sound. Fame, which was founded in 1959, became a center of Southern soul recording, with artists including Aretha Franklin, Otis Redding, and Wilson Pickett. 10 years later, a group of house musicians left Fame to start their own studio, Muscle Shoals Sound. It, too, attracted luminaries, including Aretha, Percy Sledge, the Rolling Stones, Paul Simon, and many more. Both studios became famous for the deep grooves and subtle touches of their house bands, which could lend Southern grit and grace to just about anyone who walked in the door. The studios are the worthy subjects of an exhibition currently on display about 2.5 hours' drive north in Nashville at the Country Music Hall of Fame. The show, called Muscle Shoals Low River Rising, runs through March 31st. Although the studios are not primarily known for country music, plenty of country artists have found their way there over the years, including Willie Nelson, Chris Stapleton, Shenandoah, and Bobby Gentry. The exhibition includes one of Aretha's pianos, an electric guitar that belonged to Duane Allman, one of Wilson Pickett's stage outfits, and a lot more. Kyle Young, CEO of the Country Music Hall of Fame and Museum, says of Muscle Shoals, quote, "The Tennessee River flowed through this place, and instead of drawing a boundary, somehow forces came together. Black and white sounds, R&B, blues, soul, and country met between the banks," unquote. There's also a good documentary called just Muscle Shoals, which came out in 2013 and features interviews with many of the players at the two studios and some of the people who recorded there. You can find it on assorted streaming services. And that wraps us up for this week. Remember, The Progressive South is a nonprofit enterprise, and you can find information about supporting us on our website, theprogressivesouth.org. You can also reach out to me directly at jmayshark@theprogressivesouth.org. Thanks to our friends in Bark for our theme music, and to Lord Seth the Libertarian for his production work at Barbarian Productions. And thanks to you for listening. Talk to you next time.